Saying goodbye to the ones we love is always difficult. Perhaps the hardest thing we can ever do is letting go. But there's a fine line that exists between love and obsession, and an even thinner line between obsession and madness. Perhaps the most famous example of this comes to us from Florida in the early part of the 20th century. There once lived a doctor who became so obsessed with one of his patients that he refused to let her go, even long after she died. This is the story of Dr. carlvoncosel. Carlvoncosel was born Carl Tanzler. He was a German-born bacteriologist who worked at the United States Marine Hospital in Key West, Florida. He was born in Dresden, Germany in 1877, and he became something of a world traveler before settling in Florida. Throughout his early years, Carl would often tell friends and acquaintances that he was visited by visions of a dead ancestor named Countess Anna Constantia von Cosel, who revealed to him the face of his one true love, a raven-haired beauty whom he never stopped looking for. Carl married a woman named Doris Anna Schaefer, and together they had 2 daughters, one of whom died of diphtheria at age 10. As a young man, he traveled to India and from there to Australia, where he developed an interest in sailing. He emigrated to the United States in 1926, first setting sail from Rotterdam to Havana, Cuba, before landing on U.S. soil not long after. He was joined in Zephyrillus, Florida by his wife and 2 daughters, although he left the 3 of them behind after he took a job as a radiologist in a Key West hospital, assuming the name Carlvoncosel. On April 22, 1930, while working at the Marine Hospital, Carl met a beautiful young Cuban woman named Maria Elena Malegra de Hoyos, or just Elena to friends. Carl recognized her immediately as the raven-haired beauty he'd been looking for his entire life. But the news wasn't good for Elena. Her x-rays showed advanced stage tuberculosis, and Carl knew the young woman only had a short time to live. Carl professed his love to her, and he convinced her that he could cure her with daily doses of x-rays and a tonic he made from a combination of gold and water. During the time that Carl treated Elena, he showered her with gifts of jewelry and clothing, although she rebuffed his advances at every turn. Despite Carl's best efforts, Elena Hoyos died on October 25, 1931. Grief-stricken, Carl paid for Elena's funeral, and with the permission of her family, he commissioned the construction of an above-ground mausoleum for her in Key West Cemetery. Night after night, Carl visited Elena's grave, where he would profess to her his love and tell her how much he missed her. Until one night, she finally answered him. Carlvoncosel claimed that during his nightly vigils, Elena's spirit began to appear to him and serenade him with a favorite Spanish love song. She would whisper to him how lonely she was in the cold, dark cemetery, and how she wanted nothing more than to be able to come home with him. This went on for nearly 2 years until one evening in April 1933, Carl decided he couldn't take it anymore, and he had to act. So the old man crept through the cemetery and removed Elena's remains from the mausoleum, carting the body back to his home on a toy wagon. He placed the body in his bed, but the warm, moist Florida weather had not been kind to what remained of Elena. Carl pieced the bones back together using wire and coat hangers. He fitted glass eyes into the skull cavity, and replaced her skin with silk cloth coated in wax and plaster of Paris. He replaced what remained of her hair with a wig, then packed the abdomen and chest cavity with rags to maintain the body's shape. He dressed her in stockings, gloves, and jewelry, and he sprayed her with large amounts of perfume and disinfectants to mask the putrid odor. Carl lived with Elena like that for 7 years. It was a daily struggle to keep decomposition at bay, and by the time authorities caught on to what he was doing, Elena looked more like some sort of freaky homemade mannequin than a human corpse. In October 1940, Elena's sister began hearing rumors of what Carl had done. She confronted the old man at his home, then notified authorities when she realized, much to her horror, the rumors were true. Carl was arrested, given a psychiatric evaluation, and found mentally competent to stand trial for grave robbing and desecration. He was brought before the Monroe County Courthouse to answer for his crime, but the charges were soon dropped, and he was set free because the statute of limitations had already expired. Elena's corpse was examined by several physicians and pathologists, and soon after it was put on display at a local funeral home, where nearly 7,000 spectators showed up to see what Carl had done. Eventually, Elena's body was returned to Key West Cemetery, where she was reburied in an unmarked grave in an undisclosed location to prevent further tampering. Today, you can visit Florida's Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum to see a life-size replica of Elena's body. News of what Carl von Cosel had done went nationwide, and public sentiment was surprisingly positive toward him. The general attitude seemed to be that Carl was just an eccentric old man pining for a lost love. Decades later, a darker side of the tale would come forward when some pathologists suggested that there were signs of necrophilia. But even today, those stories remain in dispute. In 1944, Carl moved to Pasco County to be close to his wife Doris, who still lived in Zephyrhills, Florida. In 1947, he wrote an autobiography that appeared in the pulp magazine Fantastic Adventures. Something that's not as often reported about Carl was that even in the years after his discovery and arrest, he still couldn't let Elena go. So he made another. He used Elena's death mask to construct a life-sized effigy of her, and he lived with it until his own death on July 3, 1952. Some people say that Carl was found dead in the effigy's arms, although others claim this is just a myth, and that he was found collapsed on the floor of his home next to a piano organ. One other story that's almost certainly not true and probably just someone's idea of a romantic ending to the tale goes that the figure Carl died with wasn't a plaster effigy at all, but the real Elena, and that at some point he had gone back to the cemetery and found her corpse and dug it up and brought it back with him so that she could be with him until the day he died, and for all eternity after. Thanks for watching. If you like this content and want to see more like it, leave me a comment and be sure to hit the subscribe and bell icons to be alerted when new videos are posted.